Saturday, August 10th. German planes today stepped up the tempo of their raids over the British Isles. Following the extensive attacks of last night, the Nazi raiders came back again this morning for a series of daring daytime attacks. There's also a new burst of activity in Africa. Italy claims to have bombed the airfield and port at Berbera, capital of British Somaliland. Britain claims to have set fire to Italian ships in a raid on Tobruk. But now the news direct, Berlin and London. First to the German capital.
This is Berlin. The French ships and French crews which are serving with the English Navy or the Merchant Marine will be treated as pirates and shown no mercy. That was an official statement handed out by the Foreign Office this morning at the press conference. The Foreign Office was referring to French ships and some French planes as well, which are now reported to be serving under General de Gaulle with the British forces. The German attitude is that these Frenchmen are violating the armistice and so do not have the status of legal combatants. They will not be treated as war prisoners, warned the German radio last night. And the implication being that, as they are now identified as pirates here, they may suffer the penalties of being shot when taken prisoner. And then we learned this morning that the Lithuanian and Latvian legations in Berlin are refusing to surrender to the Russians. The Russians, as you know, took over those Baltic countries several weeks ago. The Russian embassy in Berlin has attempted to take over the Baltic legations here, but the Lithuanian and Latvian ministers refuse to allow them entrance. The Estonian legation has already allowed itself to be annexed by the Soviet embassy in Berlin. The Foreign Office officials here said this morning that diplomatic siege might be concluded in a few days. The official German news agency carries a story from New York this morning that reports that a new type of gas would be used by Germany in its impending invasion of England. According to the story, with this gas, the Germans could occupy the British Isles without any resistance. As a shirt tail to this American report, the German news agency identifies the story as a part of British propaganda, and that it is a part of a British alibi for England's future methods of fighting off the invader. That is the editorial conclusion given out here. And there's another American angle to the German news this morning. According to the midday paper, the Wolf Urblatt, the London Times has hired an American, a Professor Goodhart, and according to Berlin, this professor is engaged in proving through the editorial columns of the London Times that Germany is to be responsible if anybody starves this winter in Europe. It is further reported that this Professor Goodhart argues that it is Hitler's duty to feed Europe. And he, the professor, that Germany possessed great food reserve. And of course, there is expected denial of this premise and its accompanying statements. Germany never intended to starve women and children, writes the Wolfer Blatt, though Great Britain has done so in South Africa, India, the Sudan, and during the World War. And then the Bursen Zeitung describes this Times article as another trick of Buff Cooper. Quote, Britain tried to blockade Germany, but now that this weapon has been turned against them, they discover their sympathies for starving women and children. End of quote. So you can see that with the exception of occasional big air and sea battles, such as occurred on Thursday in the English Channel, the war continues to be largely a journalistic campaign at this stage of the proceedings. That is, there is little hint of the preparations and the strategy for the invasion of England to be found in the press here. And so the newspapers have to furnish the public with an editorial campaign, an editorial blitzkrieg for the present. And then for the ladies. A new kind of stocking will be exhibited for the first time at the Leipzig Fair. These stockings are reported to be gnat-proof and waterproof. However, the advance notices do not indicate whether these stockings are protection against higher caliber insects, such as the German mosquito. This is Edwin Hartridge. I return you now to Columbia in New York.
This is New York. Here's a dispatch from Rome. Italian airplanes preparing for a direct attack by troops have bombed the port and airfield of Berbera, capital and chief port of British Somaliland, hitting one ship and setting fire to two grounded planes. A high command communique asserted today. Italian planes were said to have bombed effectively a railroad station and a concentration of British mechanized units. The communique quoted reliable information that Italian bombing planes hit the British battleship Resolution and damaged it seriously during a bombing action off the Balearic Island August 1st, and that they also damaged a destroyer. Resolution is a 15-inch gun battleship of 29,150 tons. It was reported that British forces were fortifying themselves for a stand at Berbera. Now, news from the British capital, reported by Edward Armero. Go ahead, London.
This is London. German bombers last night launched what was probably the most widespread air attack against England since the war began. Bombs fell on a town in the northwest of England, destroying several houses and causing an unknown number of casualties. A number of places in the southeast, a few places in the northeast and southwest, and in Wales were bombed. Some property was set on fire by incendiary bombs. This morning's official communique makes no mention of damage to industrial plants. There are no reports of German planes shot down. 12 high explosive bombs were dropped by a lone German plane near a town in the southeast of England this morning. Buildings where men at work were machine gunned. There were some casualties. The windows of houses were blown in, and there was some material damage. The Germans have renewed their mine-laying operations around British harbors. This activity, coupled with their determined attacks against coastal shipping, are seen by some as a sign that the long-promised invasion is not imminent. The Overseas League has decided to give a tea party on August 15th, that date freely mentioned by the Germans when they were to end the war against Britain. The tea party is to be given for members of His Majesty's forces from overseas, who are cordially invited to celebrate the non-arrival of Hitler and Mussolini according to plan. In the days of peace, Britain had a number of distressed areas, regions that had been stripped by mining and industry and left as barren deserts where there was no work. Today, distressed areas are being created all around the coasts, particularly in those areas where German invasion threatens. People have left their homes, their shops and offices, and come inland. Shopkeepers have seen their customers depart, their businesses dwindle, but still they must pay rent and taxes. The government is being urged to provide some measure of relief for these new distressed areas, in order that the nation as a whole may share the sacrifices imposed upon those who live and work, or rather who did live and work, in the coastal areas. It's a problem which will tax the resources and the ingenuity of the government seriously during coming months. There's another problem which the winter will bring if there is no invasion, and that is how the morale and spirit of some 20 divisions of troops, many of them from overseas, is to be maintained during the wet, black winter of inactivity. We are assured by responsible officials that Britain will not go hungry during the winter, but it takes more than food to fight a war. Britain's immediate need is for munitions and machines, manpower in the factories rather than in the army. Mr. Bevan, the Minister of Labor, is now undertaking a survey, which many people have urged for months. He is conducting an inquiry into the working history of more than 1 million men. Every man who has been an engineer or a metal worker since 1929 must register and give the details of his experience. Failure to register may involve a fine of $400 or 3 months in jail. The Minister of Labor wants to put all the men who have had experience as engineers or metal workers back to work at their old trades. And he has the power to tell them where they will work and for what wage. After repeated questions in the House of Commons and criticism in the daily press, Prince Frederick of Prussia, 29-year-old grandson of the ex-Kaiser, has been interned. He has been in England since the beginning of the war and has spent most of his time as the house guest of various distinguished British subjects. London diplomatic circles believe the four-cornered diplomatic crisis over the rich province of French Indochina will soon be resolved. Japan demands military, naval, and air bases in this region. The government of Marshal Pétain has not yet agreed. Native Tonganese and Annamite troops are massing, and French submarines there have left their bases. While Germany is reported pressing the French to yield, China has answered by concentrating 2 or 3 armies at Yunnan to the north. They're believed ready to enter the French possession the moment the Japanese move. Facing some 50,000 Indo-Chinese soldiers are 2 divisions of Japan's mechanized troops. The bulk of the Japanese Navy is now reported lying between the island of Hainan and the coast of Indochina. If Marshal Pétain resists, there appears no doubt that Indochina will become a battlefield. The diplomatic correspondent of the Daily Herald this morning declares that the men of Vichy will not resist. Japan, it's believed here, will use the same technique that Russia used with the small Baltic states. She will take over the strategic points granted her, and moving out from them, will occupy the entire country. Altogether, the French can muster as many as 300,000 native troops in that area, nearly all riflemen. Around 300 American warplanes are believed stored in Indochina, planes which were bought by the Chinese Air Force, but pilots to fly them are lacking. I return you now to CBS in New York.
That was Edward R. Murrow reporting from London. Here in New York is Linton Wells to give you more news and his analysis of developments. Mr. Wells.
The Anglo-Italian situation in Africa continues to develop, with claims and counterclaims being made. In North Africa, the situation seems to be that the Italian drive eastward along the Mediterranean coast toward Alexandria, Cairo, and the Suez Canal is stymied, temporarily at least, with RAF planes hammering away at the Italian bases in Libya, particularly at Tobruk, where it was reported that a number of ships were set on fire. But in East Africa, there is considerable activity. The RAF claims that its planes bombed Italian concentrations on the Hargeisa-Tug-Argon road in British Somaliland and made direct hits on anti-aircraft batteries and buildings at Massawa, the capital of Italian Eritrea, lying to the north along the Red Sea. At Maigadaga, near Gura in Ethiopia, they claim to have destroyed a field dump, and at Nageli, 2 grounded Caproni planes. Contrarily, Rome says that Italian planes have bombed the port and airfield of Berbera, the British Somaliland capital, and hit 1 ship and set fire to 2 grounded RAF planes. Elsewhere in British Somaliland, the Italians declare they are making progress, and as no British denials have been made, the fascist claims would certainly appear to be true. The Somaliland picture at the moment appears to be that Roman legions are moving eastward along the Gulf of Aden between Zela and Berbera. The port of Zela was occupied last Tuesday, you will recall. In the interior, an Italian column from Ethiopia has captured Bohatli Wells in the southeastern section of the Protectorate. Like most Somali towns, Bohatli Wells is little more than a collection of mud huts, important as a British Camel Corps base and a caravan watering point on the road from southern Ethiopia to Berbera. From Bohatli Wells, the Italians will undoubtedly move northwestward on Barao, if they're not doing it already, and endeavor to make contact with another column now driving eastward on Barao from Odwena. Barao is the headquarters of the British Camel Corps and has the largest airdrome in the Protectorate, and, like most points in Somaliland, is practically indefensible, particularly by the small forces and a few obsolete airplanes which must defend them against overwhelming Italian odds. In East Africa last September, I learned that the Somali Camel Corps, which was mechanized by the British about 10 years ago, had not then been increased beyond its normal strength of about 1,000 men, principally black Somalis officered by able British regulars, and that is probably the approximate size of it now. After Barao, the strategic points for the Italians to capture are Berbera and Sheikh. Then it will be all over but the shouting. Berbera is the capital on the flat, torrid seacoast, an easy prey to Italian warbirds. Symbolic of its defenses is an ancient muzzle-loading cannon, which rests in the center of its common. Sheikh is some 60 miles away in the high, cool hills and is the seat of the British Somaliland government. It is susceptible of good defense, but while RAF flyers from Aden are supporting their beleaguered comrades, the British seem to have no choice but to abandon the Protectorate to the Italians and withdraw to Aden, which lies 100 miles across the Gulf of Aden. This, it is hinted, in London will be done. Then Italy will be in possession of 1,200 miles of coastline along the Gulf of Aden and Red Sea, and in control of the southern approaches to the Red Sea, and therefore the Suez Canal, with excellent chances of ousting the British from their Gibraltar at Aden and on the nearby island of Perim without very great difficulty.
And with this analysis by Linton Wells from New York, Columbia concludes at this time another morning report of European developments. Earlier, we listened to Edwin Hartridge reporting from Berlin, Edward R. Murrow reported from London. Larry Elliott speaking. This is the Columbia Broadcasting System.